I like Mondays because they're also for motivation. And it's fitting that we're ending the show today with a little bit of motivation. And for every victory that one bags, there's usually an obstacle to overcome. Now, of course, the question we want to ask, what could be your biggest obstacle this year?
Yes, indeed. Stephen Omojigbe is here with us once again this morning to help answer that very crucial question. Now, for every one of us, it might be different. But what is your take?
So there is one very big obstacle every super achiever is going to have to deal with. And let me say it this way. So 95% of our lives, 95% of our lives is lived from the subconscious.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Which means that our lives is basically a printout of our subconscious programs. Right.
So I feel like you're saying our biggest obstacle could be us. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly where I'm going. You're brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
So 95% of our lives is lived from the subconscious. Our subconscious, our lives is a printout of our subconscious behaviors. That's why, for example, children of the rich, they just become rich, even though they cannot explain why they are rich, because they have subconscious programs that have been put in them right from when they are small, when they are young, that it just allows them to automatically do certain things, think certain ways, and say certain things that move them towards wealth. So here's the problem. There are going to be a lot of people this year who will consciously, using their conscious brains, create plans, like build ideas and make plans and set goals around some area of their lives they want to change. This year, 2019, I'm going to stop smoking. This year, 2019, I'll be more loving to my children and my wives. This year, 2019, I'm going to make some more money. And many of them are going to be committed to those goals, and they're going to try and work that plan, and they're still going to fail to achieve it.
Wow.
Because if you have a program that is against your conscious desires, all the time, Titi, all the time, the subconscious wins. Why? Because our brains, it's occupied 95% by subconscious activities. So just by neural processing power, the subconscious mind is 1,000,000 times,
Wow.
1,000,000 times more powerful than the conscious part of our brains.
So even if you're daily taking actions and going through the motions, the fact that there's something else inhibiting you subconsciously then means that you might not meet those goals.
Psychologists would call it the unconscious collusion. Now, the way the world is designed is that the things you want you, right? So as you move towards them, they should move towards you. But you find a lot of people who say, the more I work hard, the poorer I become. The more I try to be loving towards my wife, the worse the marriage becomes. The more I try to be gentle with my children, the more I find myself getting angry at them. They are committed to their conscious goals, but because of the unconscious collusion. Unconscious collusion is when there's something inside of you, a part of your soul that is broken apart, that does not want what you want. If I can quickly tell us a story. So this woman comes into the counseling room. Her marriage is in trouble. And the reason was that growing up, she grew up with a father who was cheating on the mother. And they were constantly quarreling and fighting about that. And so she made a conclusion, a vow. No man will ever treat me like that. So she gets married to this wonderful, fantastic man that loves her. But then he gets promoted at work and he's spending more time outside home and spending more time in the office. And she begins to nag him and nag him and nag him until he decides, I don't want any of your nagging. So he begins to go to some places to hang out immediately after he closes from work. And of course, he meets someone, and then an affair started. And then, of course, Mrs. Sensitive catches on that, and then the marriage breaks. And then as I explained it to her, she said, I didn't want my marriage to break. But then she found out that she unconsciously destroyed her marriage. So a lot of people are going to struggle this year, not because they are not good people, not because they are not committed to their goals, but because they have something that is working against those goals. And they must overcome that if they want to go forward.
I think we have to take this a little bit further, but we will take a short break and be back.
Yeah. Welcome back. We're talking about obstacles to your progress and your success and meeting your goals in 2019. And Stephen Omojigbe was telling us a compelling story about a lady who, with her own nagging and her own hands, she's you know, essentially destroyed her marriage. So talk to us more about how we can then navigate our way out of this.
Yeah, so before we talk about how you can get out of it, let's quickly talk about how do you recognize that this might be happening in your life.
Right.
And it's very simple. Look at the symptoms. Look at the results. If the results in your life are not commensurate with the effort, the activities, your desires, your plans, the things you're committed to, if you're being defeated and you can't explain it, you know, in this part of the world, it's a spiritual thing, it's somebody from the village and all that. Maybe those things are true, but most of the time, it is the unconscious collusion that is creating the problem. So how do you solve it? There are several ways these negative programs can be destroyed. One happens naturally, actually, because sometimes people get to rock bottom and there's nowhere else to go. And so suddenly there is a natural crashing of that program. And then the only place they can go is help. But you don't want to wait, you know, until you get to rock bottom. Yep. You don't want to wait until your marriage is destroyed. You don't want to wait until your health is destroyed. You don't want to wait until you're begging on the street before you get your unconscious programs changed. A simple way to do it, and it's so simple. It's so simple that people don't want to do it. It's to repeat. There are two ways to train the subconscious. One is hypnosis, which is what happens to children. Because between 0 and 7, children don't learn consciously. They learn by hypnosis. They just watch and download stuff. Because their consciousness before the age of 7 is below, I mean, their brain before the age of 7 is below the frequency of consciousness. So it's called theta. So they kind of download stuff. So you can change your programs by hypnosis, but I don't advise that. There's a simpler way you can change it. It's repetition.
Okay, repeating what exactly?
Repeating what? Repeating the opposite of the program. So first you must understand the program, and you do that by unpacking your story. You go back and look at your experiences you've had and ask yourself, what has my experiences taught me about myself that is sabotaging my life today? What has it taught me about marriage that is sabotaging my life today? What has it taught me about finances? For example, a lot of people have the scarcity mentality. They say there is no money, there are no lands, but there is money, there are lands, you just don't have it. So you need to unpack your story, especially
this unpacking progress is sounding very deep.
Yeah,
like
it's
deep
actually,
process.
It's a coaching process, right? It's a counseling process where someone who understands this thing walks you through your life story, helps you identify the themes and the programs that has been, deposited inside of you. Once you understand the program, you now find something opposite it, and then repeatedly. That's why if you want to learn from A to Z, you go over it a couple of times. After that, you don't have to go over it consciously anymore. And so by the process of repetition, faith comes by hearing. Repetition. And usually I counsel 30 days. Take 30 days and just go to the roots of that program and change it. Once that thing sinks into your subconscious, you have another subconscious program that begins to give you the results you want.
Okay, so I'm trying to find an example to explain to someone watching. For instance, you mentioned a parent constantly shouting at a child. So the opposite of that is?
It's not the action of the parent.
Okay.
It's what that impacted into the child.
Okay.
Right. So for that child, it has impacted into the child that the only way to discipline a child is to shout.
Okay.
All right. That is what you want to counter. It's the interpretation, the impact, the message of the activity. What did it leave you with? I grew up in a very, very, very abusive home. My parents loved us, but they didn't know how to love us. And so I grew up believing that I was a stupid guy, that nothing good could come out of me. And so that led me into a lot of self-sabotaging efforts. I get opportunities, I say, I cannot do it. I check out of it. I set a goal, I try a little bit. As soon as it's about that I want to succeed, something tells me you're not supposed to succeed, so I back out. And so it becomes a self-repeating, sabotaging effort. Okay. When I recognized that, I just went, wrote some affirmations, went about it 30 days, every morning and night. This is like 22 years ago. Wow. Until and when the program crashes, you will know. Because there will be a new sense of thoughts that constantly comes out of you, especially when you reach obstacles. You know what kind of programs you have by listening to your own self-talk. Okay.
So I want to. I mean, I like the direction that this conversation is going. Sometimes. When people realize that they need help, for instance, they're watching the show now and they're saying to themselves, okay, you know what? I think I'm beginning to discover where my problem is, right? do they then seek professional help, or is this something that you can say to yourself that I have the discipline enough to give myself the time to do this kind of activity?
Oftentimes, you will do better talking to a professional. You will do faster talking to a professional, because there are usually themes and patterns that once you start to talk to a professional, you can quickly identify it and lead you in the right path. But you can also do it yourself. That's why that whole industry is called the self-help industry.
Right.
You can get books that talk about these things, and you can begin to read them and do some reflections and do some thinking. But usually, it will be better if you have somebody you can talk with, because it's very difficult to see yourself. It's hard for us to really see ourselves. In fact, as we're talking, somebody might be there who has this problem and he can't identify it. And that's not my problem. He doesn't know. It takes someone else looking at your patterns, looking at the way your life has gone, looking at your antecedents, to be able to say, I think there's a program here that is working. So it's faster, it's more effective, you get it done with quicker. I mean, I spent about 7 years trying to change my life programs, and I spent 7 days changing it for people today. So it's something that it will benefit you if you talk to a professional.
Wow.
Okay, so now I have I have an issue with. Okay, it's not really an issue. A lot of people see the religious leaders as that professional. Now, I'm not pointing towards a particular religion right now, but then again, there is that whole God forbid mentality, speaking positively as opposed to speaking negatively. So do the religious leaders and religious counselors also have it right?
A lot of Christian religious principles, which is what I'm familiar with, actually follow these principles.
Okay.
For example, faith comes by hearing.
Okay.
Right? So if you hear a thing over and over and over again, it's still the same process of repetition. Okay. The only problem there is you can be in a church and you're listening to messages about money, but your problem is marital. You can be in a church and your pastor is good at things that has to do with spirituals, but your problem is financial. So you may not be getting the repeated word that will change your particular circumstance from the particular preacher. Apart from that, the laws and the principles by which I believe God created this world, which is what science is discovering, a lot of pastors don't even have access to it. Wow. And so you can have someone who is not religious, who understands how these things work. For example, I tell people, if you want to learn about money, your pastor is not most likely the person to go to, because he may not have a lot of it. You want to talk to someone who is rich, because success has a structure. Failure also has a structure. And so if you know how the rich think, if you know how the rich behave, if you know what they do, you can learn those practices and you can be rich. Your pastor may not necessarily be rich, and he may not necessarily know how to do that, how to make wealth happen. Same thing, you can have a pastor who is called of God and who is a good man, is a moral man, but he does not understand women. He doesn't understand men. He doesn't understand marriage, and so he may not be able to help you. But a lot of religious leaders have incorporated this truths and this wisdom into what they do, and they can really help their people.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always wanted to ask, I mean, regarding this, I mean, we've seen that, okay, we can, it's possible for you to identify your problem, yes, especially if you've seen maybe like a repeated pattern in your life. But there are people who live in self-denial.
Yeah.
It could also be based on religion.
Yeah.
The fact that, Titi was saying just now, God forbid, right? And then for a long time, you're still in that denial and you're basically living in hope that something will change, a miracle is going to happen, and all of that. How do I begin to take positive steps in the right direction?
For those kind of people, they're the ones that you have to depend on nature helping them. They have to get to the rock bottom, or someone calling them out with tough love. If, for example, you're married to someone who's denying that the marriage is bad, and who's just denying that the sex is not good, that the communication is bad, and he covers it up with some kind of religious stuff, one of the things the spouse of that person can do is what I call create a crisis for them. Wow. Put them in a situation where they have to make a decision. Do you want me? Do you want this marriage? If not, now I'm not advising that people divorce, but I'm saying you have to create a situation where the person is forced to look at themselves. Wow. All right, is forced to seek a counselor, is forced to look and get some objective counsel. If not, you're going to have to wait for nature, for life to teach them. And sometimes that can be very, very terrible.
And it can be one of those wake-up calls that you might not see coming.
Yeah.
But Stephen Amojuigbe, it's always a pleasure having you.
Always
in
a
the
pleasure.
Always a
studio.
pleasure to be here.
We're absolutely motivated this Monday.
Yes,
and hopefully, if you were thinking about 2019, you were a bit anxious about what would happen if there's going to be a repeat of 2018. At least now, you're beginning to see some of the things that you can do to change things and change your life.